Tansen Atute Magtiar Wheatley Nisigasun. Tawaw, welcome to APTN National News. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced at a press conference in Edmonton the first set of projects to be reviewed by the new Major Projects Office. 5 projects will be immediately referred to the office for consideration. Carney says the 5 projects would generate $60 billion for the Canadian economy and create tens of thousands of jobs. An Indigenous Advisory Committee made up of 11 representatives from across Canada has also been named. Our Dennis Ward shows you all of the news has mixed reviews.
5 projects will be immediately referred to the Major Project Office for consideration. Top of that list is the expansion of the LNG Canada Phase 2 in Kitimat, British Columbia, which includes involvement from the Haida First Nation. No new oil pipelines or enhancements of infrastructure into Northern Ontario's critical mineral-rich Ring of Fire are mentioned. The Prime Minister said none of the major projects will move ahead unless they advance the interests of Indigenous peoples.
To be in Canada's national interest, a major project must strengthen Canada's autonomy, our resilience, and our security. It must have clear benefits for Canadians. It must have a high likelihood of being completed. It must contribute to clean growth in Canada's climate goals. And it must advance the interests of Indigenous peoples.
In addition to the 5 projects being announced on Thursday for referral to the Major Project Office, the feds identified strategic areas of focus they say will be transformative for Canada. Among them is the Port of Churchill. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew called it a great day for Churchill, Manitoba, and Canada.
One of the things that I really appreciated seeing the federal government talk about today, the Prime Minister mentioning in particular, but also their news release, is the idea of icebreakers being in Hudson Bay to help us have year-round shipping seasons here. Now, there's a lot of work that's going to have to happen. We got to think about wildlife, environment. Our Indigenous partner governments are going to have a lot of input in this process.
Part of the Major Projects Office includes an Indigenous Advisory Council that was announced Wednesday evening. 11 representatives from across the country will sit on the council. British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia have 1 seat each on the council. Both Saskatchewan and Quebec have 2, and the remaining 2 advisors are from the north. Reaction to the Advisory Council and the list of projects has been swift.
And so when I think about any projects that come through Manitoba, you will have to talk to our First Nations leadership first before you enter into our territories. Without that permission, you won't be coming into the region.
Kinew feels it was a missed opportunity not to include a First Nations representative from Manitoba on the Advisory Council.
The MMF is going to have a role as a Métis government, but the First Nations have to be given that opportunity to engage. They have to have inclusion. So again,
Dennis Ward, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And we'll discuss more with our Truth and Politics panel later in the show. In Labrador, the inquiry respecting the treatment, experiences, and outcomes of Innu in the child protection system continues this week. At the Sheheshit Innu Nation 3 years after the launch of the inquiry, Nungonske Rose Jacobs reports.
The week-long hearings focus on the Innu history, the impact of child welfare, and the federal role in child protection in Innu communities. Witness Apatet Ben Andrew is from the Sheheshit First Nation. He testified Innu history must be known to understand the impacts of the child protection system.
I continue to seek out elders to listen to their stories because I had a need to understand why we're now living so differently than the way earlier generations had for centuries lived in Nujmit. Why were these differences so harmful, so widespread, affecting all the families, not just me and my family?
Commissioners James Igliorti, Anastasia Cupie, and Mike Devine are hearing testimonies from Innu community members and officials from Indigenous Services Canada at the Youth Centre in Sheheshit Innu First Nation, located 40 kilometers north of Happy Valley Goose Bay. Mike Devine summarized the hearings.
Since it started in May of 2022, the inquiry has heard from about 100 community members during our 8 weeks of community meetings in both Sheshi and Natwashi. We heard personal, heart-rending and inspiring stories of lived experience of Innu.
The Innu Nation demanded an inquiry in 2022 after 6 Innu youth in care or aftercare died, including 3 deaths by suicide. The inquiry was officially launched in May 2022, including investigations into the deaths of the 6 youth. The Innu say youth in provincial care lost culture, language, and familial connection. APTN says colonialism destroyed Innu traditional ways of life.
As I said, the formal transmission of this knowledge was forbidden by the priest. We were no longer being raised up immersed in Innu culture. We were immersed in some new and unknown culture of trauma. Our healthy Innu ways have been replaced by our powerful processes of the church and education.
The final report is expected to be completed by October 31st, 2026. Nagonska Rose Jacobs, APTN National News, Chibuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Moose hunting season begins next week near Bloodvein River First Nation in eastern Manitoba, but non-Indigenous hunters pursuing the sacred animal will be turned away at check stops managed by the community in an effort to protect the moose population and their food security. Here's Sav Jonza with a deeper look at the conflict.
Elders of a First Nation in Manitoba say the moose population in their traditional territory is dwindling. They say in 2024, the community was able to harvest only 1 moose to share amongst its few hundred residents.
It's just not like it was anymore. It's dead.
Members of Bloodvein River First Nation are using check stops to prevent non-Indigenous people looking to hunt the sacred animal from entering the area 200 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg. They say the decision comes after years of moose overhunting by big game enthusiasts, leaving little chance for local hunters to sustain their food security.
We've reported it to conservation officers to no avail. We had issues on poaching, sport hunting, and moose being killed just for the antlers.
Their chief, Lisa Young, says a 2024 aerial survey by the Manitoba government confirms the moose population is critically low in some areas of their traditional territory, but stable in others. She's asking the province to stop issuing moose licenses for the zones.
We are concerned that the government of Manitoba has issued hundreds of moose tags this year without consulting with us, much less seeking our consent. For these reasons, we have implemented a moose hunting ban in our traditional territories.
But hunting organizations in the province aren't happy with the restriction and are calling for intervention before the location's hunting season starts September 15th. In a letter to RCMP, the Manitoba Wildlife Federation urged the removal of what they call an illegal barrier blocking access to an undefined area of provincial Crown land. They state on their website that while the Manitoba Wildlife Federation acknowledges Bloodvein River First Nation's jurisdiction over its designated reserve land of approximately 1,600 hectares, this blockade affects a much larger area of provincial Crown land that is legally open to all Manitobans. In a public statement, the Manitoba Lodges and Outfitters Association echoed the need for access to the area and urged the Manitoba government to resolve the blockade. Their executive director, Don Lamont, said, "This isn't the first threat of this kind coming from Indigenous communities in recent months. We're concerned that this kind of action could happen elsewhere." When asked for an interview, Lamont said he had no more to say. APTN News did not hear back from the Manitoba Wildlife Federation before airtime. In an emailed statement, Minister of Natural Resources and Indigenous Futures, Ian Bushy, said he understands the importance of ensuring a stable moose population. He says his department has repeatedly met with both sides and commits to continue working in partnership with Indigenous communities and hunters to support the long-term sustainability of moose, ensure safe and respectful hunting practices, and make sure that hunting, fishing, and trapping can continue for generations to come. Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kyra Wilson had this to say about First Nations sovereignty.
When we think about the province or any organization that believes that they have the right to speak on our nations, you do not. You do not have the right to speak on our nations. You do not have the right to issue licenses to hunt in our ancestral lands and territories.
Chief Angela Lavasseur of Nissequawestic Cree Nation, around 450 kilometers northwest of Bloodvein, says the moose overhunting issue affects many First Nations across the province. She says Bloodvein's check stop isn't a threat to non-Indigenous hunters, but food insecurity for First Nations is.
That's my message for these folks claiming that they're going to come and knock down blockades. You know, what little land we have left in this country, and you are basically perpetuating genocide and just espousing your racist and ethnocentric views and acting like you're entitled to our First Nations land as well. I don't think so. Hey, go Sunny. Yeah.
Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Before we head to the break, here's the scoop on what our Yellowknife video journalist Bruce Dela Cruz is working on.
Hi there. I'm at the North Slave Métis Alliance's community garden here in Yellowknife. Behind me, fresh produce and fresh flowers are thriving here up north. Stay tuned later this week as I sit down with Shirley Coumont to hear her dream of feeding her community one crop at a time. Stay tuned for that story only on APTN National News.
Pitigwe. After months of speculation, a list of major projects in the so-called national interest has been unveiled by the Carney government. The Indigenous Advisory Council, who will help guide the major projects office work to ensure there are opportunities for equity, ownership, and meaningful participation for Indigenous peoples, has also been announced. For more, our Truth and Politics panel is here. Jennifer Leowitz is the CEO of Pasqua Strategies, and Negan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Thanks to you both for being here with us. Jennifer, let's start with the Indigenous Advisory Council. Many familiar names on there, and many of them vocal advocates for economic development. Your thoughts on the Advisory Council?
I think this is kind of what we were seeing out of Bill C5 with some of the consultations that took place, is it seems like a last-ditch effort. I won't lie, it is a good thing to have those more permanent advisory councils, but I think it would have been more in touch with what the actual reality is by having representatives from the treaties, because what we're seeing right now are people that are unelected, so they are not chosen by the people. Some of those people are, names that have been heavily involved in resource development, and it's nothing against them. It's just they serve an interest to be involved in resource development. And then there's chiefs that, have been strong advocates for treaty that were nowhere to be found on any of those. And, there isn't proper representation in Manitoba either. I've already seen that the Southern Chiefs Organization has issued a letter stating that they're disappointed that they're not included in this. So I think, the Carney government is going to have to go back to the table and refigure out how they're going to consult, because I just don't think this will be effective.
Negan, the list is also notable for who's not on it. First Nations in Manitoba, as Jennifer just mentioned, the Métis Nation, Alberta, among those expressing their disappointment as well and calling for a seat at the table. Your thoughts on the Advisory Council and who is there or not there?
Well, I mean, one thing that's very notable is that they've got, I'm looking at the list right now, you've got the Manitoba Métis Federation that's on there, and the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. I mean, if you know anything about the history of the Liberal government and the Métis Nation of Ontario, and then other communities that are Eastern affiliated, there is a notable lack of people who they have very close relationships with in the past. And so in Manitoba, my social media feed is filled up of disappointment, we'll call it. I could use a number of other four-letter words that other people have used to describe this particular council. This, on one level, you were not going to create a council that was going to please everybody. There was going to be disappointment in regions across the country. On another level, force-feeding First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities who are already extremely dissatisfied over the failures within the meetings over the summer. As we've talked about in this panel many times, 2 of those 3 meetings were relatively disasters. Like with the meeting with the First Nations was a total disaster, and the meeting with the Métis, the most important contingent, the Red River Métis from the Manitoba Métis Federation, just refused to go to the meeting. And I mean, what are we doing here? And there was a certain quote within the Prime Minister's speech when he announced this morning the projects of the national interest. He said, "For too long, Canada has been asking why, and we need to ask how." And he said, "It stops today asking the question why, and we now will only talk about how." We haven't even answered why. Like, we haven't even answered who's at the table. Like, this is a pivotal, critical moment in which we do have to ask why. And First Nations, Inuit, Métis people, I think, have their own answers to why. They don't have no as the first answer. And I think it would be much better suited to ask a certain set of regional groups, for example, to appoint regional representatives. And I think treaty would have been a very good way to go. That's not, however, how the country's often built. And so that would have been a very complicated process. But you do have regional organizations that could have appointed members that represent their bodies and their interests. And certainly, I think they would have been at least felt welcome to be invited to the meeting or to a council.
Yes, there's been a lot of different opinions online right now. You know, there's been 5 projects that were also announced today: a liquefied natural gas project, 2 mining projects, 1 at the Port of Montreal, and new nuclear project in Ontario. The PM says the 5 projects would generate $60 billion for the Canadian economy and create tens of thousands of jobs. Your thoughts on the projects, Jennifer?
It's hard to have clear thoughts on this when everything seems to be moving so quickly, which is something that we were, almost expected to see out of a Carney government, was that the projects were going to get moving. I would be remiss to say that the Conservatives probably disagree that it's not moving as quickly as it should be, but in Indigenous land, everything is moving really quickly. It seems like we haven't got the consultation piece down yet. We haven't got how we even the government is supposed to consent with us down yet. This advisory panel just came out yesterday, while announcing projects seems so rushed. And, I say this every time I hear about projects running. We have to have a seat at that table. I know inevitably those projects are going to come. There's not much at this point that we can do to stop that. But bring our people to the table and make sure that we're included in not only the environmental aspects, but also the economy aspects of it as well.
Niigaan, some of the more controversial projects or ideas aren't listed in the 5 things, like the Ring of Fire or a new pipeline. Your thoughts on what's on the list and what isn't?
I'd be probably overstating it if I call this the lowest hung fruit that you could pick. But these projects are projects in which you have a number of First Nations and Métis community buy-in on some portions of them, and then you also have the two big kind of no-go words at the moment, especially for areas like British Columbia and First Nations in British Columbia, but then also First Nations across the prairies as well, and as of course pipelines. And so the not moving towards a pipeline and being aggressive with the project from the outset is probably a good strategic move. And if I were to be positive, is I think the way in which this was framed by the Prime Minister in talking about jobs that are being provided, as well as the opportunities involved with economic production within First Nations. I'm not a big fan, and I think many are not a big fan of nuclear projects. However, there is a considerable amount of buy-in within certain First Nations in Southern Ontario. And so I think that there possibly could be some buy-in. I wonder, however, if there are, as Jennifer spoke about a minute ago, is in terms of the speed. There was no announcement today of the partnership of those First Nations from the outset. There was kind of an illusion that there was some conversations, but in the coming days, I guess I'll see whether there is some universal agreement amongst those peoples of whether these projects are going to go forward, and if there's any agreements that are made. So therefore, it would be something that can be hitting the ground running.
These are definitely things that many will be on alert and watching out for, but we'll have to leave it there and continue the conversation over on the podcast. Thanks to you both. Time for a quick break. When we come back, we take you north to tell you about a proposed new national park. Cheskwa. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. It must be Bear Week at APTN National News. Jason Corshane sent in this fellow that was seen near the Shoal Lake dump near the Manitoba-Ontario border. Muskwa looks like he's ready for a long nap. For the chance to be featured on our Photo of the Day segment, send your pictures to share at aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, Charlottetown 15, Fredericton 22. Happy Valley Goose Bay 9, Cartwright 6. Chibougamau 17, Val-d'Or 19. North Bay 20, Sault Ste. Marie 18. Big Trout Lake 16, Sioux Lookout also 16. Thompson 20, God's Lake 19. Barrens River 22, Gimli 17. North Battleford 21, Regina 23. Uranium City 23, La Ronge 20. Moving west, Peace River 28, Fort Chipewyan 26. Edmonton 27, Lethbridge 28. Kamloops 24, Vancouver 17. Dease Lake 14, Smithers 18. Moving north, Rock River 6, Mayo 11. Norman Wells 11, Fort Simpson 25. Tuktoyaktuk 3, Paulatuk 9. Cambridge Bay 6, Baker Lake 7. Arctic Bay 2, Igloolik 4. A proposed new national park in the Yukon's Peel River watershed is one step closer to reality. Indigenous partners and the territorial and federal governments say a feasibility study has determined it's practical and desirable to open a national park within the watershed, also known as Titlit Guan Jik. The 74,000 square kilometer watershed in northeastern Yukon is one of the largest intact ecosystems in Canada and is home to diverse wildlife. It also has strong cultural ties to the First Nation of Nacho-Nayakdun and Gwich'in peoples in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. If established, the park would be co-managed by Nacho-Nayakdun, the Gwich'in Tribal Council, and Parks Canada.
This is a good day for the First Nation of Nacho-Nayakdun. We're really proud of the work that's been done, and we're really proud to be working alongside the leadership within the Gwich'in Tribal Council. These have been shared lands for millennium, and they just hold so much cultural and spiritual significance for our people.
The next phase for the developing the park will involve negotiating an establishment agreement. And that's your news for this Thursday. Join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm TR Wheatley. Thanks for being here. From all of us at APTN, Egase, Yitam, Kawapamitina now.